Hello, everybody, and thank you for tuning in to the Liberty Report. With us today is Chris Rossini as co-host. It must be Friday. Chris.
That is, Dr. Paul. Great to be with you.
Okay, very good. Well, we have a little program talking about here to sort things out because, we've been inundated with experts. There's so many. Everybody I met in Washington was an expert. At least he or she thought they were. I'm sure the Speaker of the House of Representatives believes she is an expert. And if only the experts got, they got promoted to leadership position. I never qualified. I wasn't an expert enough. But expert in Washington is defined a lot different. Expert in Washington is that individual who can connive and mislead and get people's attention, get power, be able to intimidate, a lot of different characteristics of what they think an expert is all about. But the truth is, Chris, I think what we should be concerned about, and you and I are concerned about it, is we do need experts. But we'd like to talk today a little bit about what type of experts and call out some of the individuals who claim they're an expert. And I guess probably the easiest target, and maybe we overdo it, but he's such a giant of an expert, fake expert, and that's Dr. Fauci. I think he just sort of lets us know, what an expert could turn into. And I'd like to think about some of the heroes in medicine. They were very, very unassuming people working by themselves, and most of the time in private medicine and all. And they were more humble people. And I would say, be suspicious when people are arrogant and making a lot of money and are beholden to some corporations. Be suspicious of those experts. They may not be the expert they claim to be. Chris, I imagine you've given this a little bit of thought.
Yes, Dr. Paul, and it doesn't matter if we're talking about the Fed chairman or, as you mentioned, Fauci, but it's so much bigger than even them. You have the Department of Education and the food pyramid and every aspect of our life. You have these so-called experts that are going to handle the economy and our health and education and food, and there's something very wrong with that. And like you said, Dr. Paul, there's nothing wrong with legitimate meritocracy experts. But when they're tied to government, the red flags have to go up right away because government is violent force. That is what government is. I mean, so many of our presidents have said that. It's not Mother Teresa, it's force. And when you mix force with any human being, you're going to get some trouble. And, we have the media cheerleads this constantly. They drill this into everyone's head. Experts say. That's all they have to do. They don't have to name names or who these people are. They just say experts. And, like a Pavlovian dog, you're just supposed to take it as gospel. But it's not even the experts themselves who are maybe even necessarily the biggest problem. Because it's not just Fauci. Fauci's one man. How much can he possibly do? He went on TV and, contradicted himself all the time. But think of all the people behind him, the corporations, the so-called globalists, the philanthropists. They just steamrolled through society using Fauci as their, the person that they put in front of us. And they just steamrolled everyone, especially with this COVID. So this is not freedom. This is not the American way. This is not the way it should be, and it really needs to change.
Well, the experts accumulate in Washington and want to run the country. The larger the government, the more experts you have. Of course, the government got large because we had previous experts, and they've created problems, so you need more experts, to solve the problems of the previous managers. But, the government now is in charge of the welfare system, taking care of people from cradle to grave. And we're also very much involved in an empire, and that takes a lot of experts. And take a look now at the combination of authority from the military-industrial complex, how they really influence legislation, what's going on in Washington. And what about the collusion of the military-industrial complex and the media? every station has a military expert, and some of them may well have had some military technical expertise, but that's not what they're on television about, because you don't really need that. If you're in a real war and you have to do it, you don't get your generals to go up there and pretend you're the expert and this is what we're going to do tomorrow. We're going to invade here and do this sort of thing. But they will there will be there, the experts are there, and they continuously do this. But the one thing is, if it comes to the welfare state and the general economy or the military operations, the empire, no matter how well motivated they are, and say, yeah, it's a big job, but we're motivated to bring about peace and prosperity, that's a different story. But the whole thing is, that type of expertise leads to trouble. It leads to bankruptcy, and it leads to the destruction of liberty. And COVID and what we've gone through these past years is such a good example of what happened with all the experts. And you can divide them up. It's amazing that the experts, the so-called experts, actually cancel out the people that I'm talking about that we should be looking up to, the private individual, the very few that are still in academic medicine. They speak out and you can identify them, but they can lose their jobs, and they get harassed and punished for just even asking for a discussion. But one reason why this doesn't work is, especially if it comes to making the economic conditions better, whether it's medical care or whatever, a group of people, an individual expert can't know what is best for somebody else. The real expertise has to be within the individual in a free society. The individual has to make the decision of what he or she does with their life, how they spend their money, who they associate with, what they think about education. But when you get the experts, and there are many, Chris, you already mentioned education. Just think of all the expertise in our universities, and the universities are nothing there but to fake everybody out on their experts. Because if you have a PhD from the university and you've studied military operations and you know about the welfare state, then you're an expert and you get a big job in Washington. So this is what's bad. But experts, the so-called experts, can't know what people want, because even when an individual has control of this, they make mistakes. But the big difference is the mistakes an individual makes in a free society affects that individual. It's a very much close at home. But the people who either do it for sinister reasons or because they think they really are experts and they can do a good job, when they make mistakes, wow, that means a lot of punishment, a lot of spending. And until those experts are refuted, and right now I would say some of the activity of the last couple of years with COVID, we still have a long way to go because of a lot of misinformation. But people are starting to wake up and say, well, maybe what they told about these masks and these vaccines, if they look around, they can find out there are questions. The least people should be looking at in that regard is at least have an honest debate. And there's more of that going on too. But they can't know what's best. And that's the reason why it's so much better to have the expertise finally be put in the laps of the individual who wants to be a free person, and not say, well, the government will take care of us, it will provide peace and prosperity for us, so I don't really have to worry about it. We had a crisis with COVID, and I got a check in the mail for $1,600, that sort of thing. That doesn't work, and it finally leads to a moral and a financial bankruptcy.
Fantastic, Dr. Paul. Yeah, and they operate under this false idea that these experts will remove risk out of life. Actually, that's their inroad. They try to make you feel comfortable. They'll make the decisions for you. Your job is to obey, but it's impossible to remove risk. It's impossible to remove costs. Every single action we make has risks and has costs. That's a fact of life that we have to deal with until we die, and it won't be eliminated. But they sell this as you just sit back, and these expertise people will tell you how to live. You obey, and you better obey. We saw in COVID or you can lose your job. They'll start putting the squeeze on you if you don't do what they say, and don't even dare go snooping around, looking around at other ideas like the Ron Paul Liberty Report. That's misinformation. And, that needs to be silenced. And, Dr. Paul and Daniel on yesterday's show, they pointed out how open they are now. Politicians are openly calling for censorship of like Joe Rogan. They're not even pretending that there's a Bill of Rights there, which shows how confident they seem to be that no one else even cares. So it's pretty scary, but this is their philosophy. They say, you do, and do not question. And, that's tyranny in a nutshell. And again, tyranny is not the way it's supposed to be, especially not in this country.
When a society or a government or a people accept the notion that there will be experts come to our rescue, the real trouble starts. But that ability to do so, because the problems keep getting worse, the bankruptcy keeps getting worse, you have to see, or you will see, an accumulation of more and more power into the government. And it's sort of like the monetary system. The worse it gets, the more money they need, the more debt they need, and the more regulators they have to have, and the more you have to depend on the Federal Reserve. But it's all an illusion. But they need power and money, and that's when it really gets corrupt, because you see the military-industrial complex and the combination of big money with big business, and now even with the lockdown on COVID, there was a combination of the big corporations cooperating with big government, and this was it sort of smells like, and it's getting close to being a fascist system. It certainly is corporatism. The corporations are making money off of most of it. This is a far cry from understanding the warning of John Adams, because he said the Constitution can work, but it's not going to work on its own. You have to have a moral people. The people have to, be willing to assume responsibilities and look at the general rules. And the general rules for the founders and so many libertarian-leaning people today is that you can't force people. You can't force people to do things. You can't use force and intimidation. But that's what government's all about. Everything is done by force. All the good things they do is done with a gun. Oh, what do you mean? That's not true. How many times does a person come to your office or your door with a gun? Well, did you ever get a letter from the IRS? They knock on the door. I'll tell you what, when I see the IRS an envelope there, I better read this thing. No, and it's intimidation, and that's how they collect the money. And then there's the collusion of big business. So then the combination and the confusion comes, because I thought big business was free enterprise. And you see them purposely distorting this. I think we saw not too long ago, the Speaker of the House said, oh, I can do that. I can use inside information to make more money because that's free enterprise. I mean, that's where it is. Putting all that, a lot of confusion, because the goal there is to maintain power, and they need it. Because the people will wake up, or the bankruptcy will demand that you quit doing it. And that's probably the way this whole thing is going to work. I'd like to suggest that we return the need and the activity of experts on how to live our lives, return to the people. And it's possible that we can move in that direction. We have our ups and downs, but the whole thing is most likely, under today's circumstances, we have a ways to go to curtail, the influence of the experts from Washington D.C., which have inundated our entire society. So it's time that we inundate the people's minds with the principles of liberty.
Very good, Dr. Paul. I will finish up with my closing statement and highlight a few of the things that you mentioned. Largely, all of this operates as an illusion and a delusion, because the delusion is that men believe that they can organize and order the world themselves. And this idea is not anything new. It goes way back, probably to the very beginning. But, only so much could be done. But recent, even the last couple hundred years, with industrialization and technology and communication, these all had wonderful things, blessings in our lives, so to speak, but also comes at a very big cost, because people that have accumulated power and money, they delude themselves into thinking that they can control everything because they can control machines, robots, computers. These things obey, they say, and these things obey. But then you have the problem of people. People have free will. We could say no. And that is a problem for people who want to order and organize the world. We could mess up their plans just by saying no, which is what probably behind the word love is probably the most powerful word, out there, just being able to say no. So that's a big problem for those who want to organize the world. So what are some of the things we read in the headlines? They actually want to turn humans into machines. Now, why would you want to do that? Because machines obey. They don't question. They don't look for other ideas. They just say yes and they obey. So you have people that are trying to basically be a creator, and that's why all this falls apart. It's impossible. These are human beings, and they ultimately run up against the truth, which knocks them down hard. But in the meantime, look at what has been done over these last few years. You have this massive suffering, you have death, you have destruction. That's what comes from these delusions. The people pay for it, for these big, huge mistakes. Like Dr. Paul says, there's only one way out of this. It's not complicated. It's very easy. It's the ideas of liberty. It's the only way. There are no shortcuts or loopholes. We either will want to be free or we will not, and then suffer the consequences. We always have to have the confidence and the conviction to use that powerful word, no.
Very, very good, Chris. We know that when there's problems out there, the people, unfortunately, right now, still think that it wasn't the government's fault as much as saying, "What's the government going to do for me? Send me a check." It wasn't the government. The government isn't being blamed, but more so, eventually, the government will get blamed. The worse the conditions get. And the one thing, what's happening today with these experts, faking it along, conditions are getting worse. There's more chaos now, and that chaos has to be contained with more force and power and elimination of liberties. That's why there's a large rebellion against these mandates right now. People, and it isn't that they're against something that is good. What they are, they're for their liberties. They don't need it. They don't need the government telling them. So there is a time when the people will finally speak out against it. But the bureaucrat never gives up, though. They go through self-deception, and the politician is always much more important to themselves than to the other people. They think that they have conquered it. Yes, they might concede a few things. Yes, this takes a little bit of taxation, and this takes a little bit of regulation. But we will monitor and take care of it, and we will always respect civil liberties, which is a bunch of baloney. They deceive themselves into believing that. But when I get to the point where I think it's getting to be a lost cause, and I don't have many lost causes because I keep thinking people could be made better if they have a wakening up to the part of what truth really is. But when you see the politicians, especially those in power, who are very vocal on saying, well, we can go to war without a declaration because it's our national security. How often do they use national security to do so many very evil things? Oh, yes, we were in the Middle East, not only for national security, but to protect our liberties. Now figure that out, And the part that gets to me eventually, there's a lot of participation at all levels of enthusiasm, but it's when that individual who had a lot to say about this could have stopped it. It went badly. People died. People got crippled. The country goes bankrupt. And there is absolutely no shame at all. No shame at all. They did everything right, and they will have an excuse. But they are psychologically incapable of ever admitting that, because they would have to say, I am a criminal. And there is a place in Christianity to handle that, but they're nowhere close to that. They will come up with excuses, and they will work harder to change history to make sure that they don't get blamed for it. Erase the bad stuff. I was reading a story just yesterday about how they're still erasing any traces to the fact that the CIA most likely was involved in the Kennedy assassination. They're still erasing things because they don't want to see that. They want to protect their reputation. So this is not a new problem. It's been with us throughout all of history. But I think the whole concept of believing that there is a higher law is important, that people should know what is right and wrong. And the system that we have today numbs the politician who caused it, and they get their back up to the wall, and they become more defensive. And in order to cancel out the bad effects of one war, they go ahead and start another war. So this cycle has to be broken, but it's been around for a long time. I would say it began with the first recording of history, but that doesn't mean we shouldn't try. Maybe this is what all life is about, is being challenged, by a higher law, higher than the Constitution, that there is an ability for man to know right and wrong, and an ability to know that killing and murder is wrong, and stealing, all these things. I think they knew it. If you read the Bible all the way back and prior to the Bible, they recognized these things, that there was such a thing as right and wrong. But today, if you look at it, I mean, just you could probably make a pretty good case for what I'm saying. Just looking at the Justice Department in our own government, it's been a little bit corrupted here in the last few years. So that is something else. But I still believe that the majority of people, they actually do know right and wrong. And most people might have a tinge of sociopathy, but they're not wild-eyed absolutists when it comes to being a sociopath. But a lot of them like to make the excuses. But I think it's easy to sort it out. The rules and raw laws in a free society, the case that the opposition makes is, that's chaotic. There'll be riots in the streets. Oh, you mean like now? No. If you allow to have a free society, you will have riots. Of course there's riots on the street because they don't honor anything about property. So this is something that people have to realize. And the whole thing about what's going on this culture of Marxism, because very deliberately and very clearly, the Marxists of old and the Marxists of today have a firm philosophic belief, not a miscellaneous belief, but they do not believe that there is such a thing as truth. There is no such a thing as right and wrong, murder is wrong, this or that. They don't believe it exists. They become the arbiter of what they say is right or wrong, and therefore what they're operating in a holy fashion. And quite frankly, you hear more analogies today than ever before that some of this movement appears to be like a religion, and that has to give it consideration. But just a couple rules. Rejection of the initiation of force against another person. When people do things that aren't harmful to you, even though you don't like what they do, be a little bit more tolerant, and try to persuade them. And whether it's a foreign country or a neighbor, a peaceful approach is much better. Persuasion and setting an example, I think, is a much better way to approach the ideas and to promote peace and prosperity. I want to thank everybody for tuning in today to the Liberty Report. Please come back soon.